On today's podcast.
As a practitioner, it's very difficult when someone comes to their doctor or practitioner, they're basically saying, I'm in pain. And remember, this doesn't need to be physical. It might be low energy. I can't sleep. My hormones are off. I have low sex drive. Like I'm in discomfort. I'm in pain of some sort. And it is only natural for a practitioner to say, okay, change this. Like take these supplements or, do these lab tests, and whatever the results come back, we go, okay, change this behavior. And I believe that practitioners and doctors, like we have good hearts. We can get frustrated because we want the change more than it feels like the client or patient wants the change.
Totally.
Like, want to shake them sometimes, being like, just do the thing because I want you to be happy and I want you to have a great life because
we want it more than they do.
And it's really important for practitioners and doctors to understand that as much as we want them to change, we are stuck in behavior modification.
If you're a healthcare provider tired of just treating symptoms and ready to dig deeper into the root causes of health issues, the Vibrant Wellness Podcast is for you. With insider tips, expert interviews, and the latest in biotech research, this podcast will take your patient care to the next level.
Hello and welcome everyone again. I'm your co-host, Dr. Emmy Brown, here with my delightfully inquisitive co-host and surprise twin for the day, Melissa Gentile. Today we have a return guest, Carly Pollack, who we just had to invite back for more inspiring nutrition wisdom as we begin to progress through 2024. Today we'll talk New Year's resolutions. New Year's resolutions that sometimes fail come February may include daily 14-hour fasts, no alcohol, reading 5 books a month, weekly social outings, or something of the like. So how do we avoid the cyclical pitfalls of resolutions and create permanent change for vibrant health? Carly is a certified clinical nutritionist, owner of Nutritional Wisdom, a thriving private practice based in Austin, Texas, and the author of Amazon's best-selling Feed Your Soul. With a blend of humor, heart, and a dash of tough love, Carly's insights are sure to inspire a more balanced, joyful approach to health and wellness, and we'll see just how she inspires that for a new year that we're settling into. So grab a snack as we chat sustainable, healthy living for a vibrant new year with Carly Pollack. Carly, welcome back to the Vibrant Wellness Podcast. Your tongue is blue. If you're not watching today, our audience might be curious. They might want to tune into the video. We'll get to talking about why your tongue is blue in a moment, but how are you? And welcome back.
I'm awesome. Thanks for having me. I am a little embarrassed because my teeth are kind of blue too now that I've turned the video on. I was telling you that I just put a PQQ lozenge in my mouth, and PQQ supports mitochondria, but it also turns your tongue blue. So here I am looking like a Smurf on a Friday.
And I'm sure, maybe we'll get to more mitochondrial health later on. But I'd love to start off with, do you make New Year's resolutions for yourself? And if not now, have you in the past? Any unique ones? Any fun stories about New Year's resolutions for you?
I don't make New Year's resolutions now. That really comes from a place of feeling like I am always checking in with myself, working on my health, looking to see what I need to put more attention on, thinking about where my body is and what sort of symptoms I have, what my body is telling me I need to do, which sounds a little kitschy. We'll get more into it because for a lot of people, they don't really understand how their body is communicating. I always say that the body doesn't speak English. It speaks in symptoms, and you can be really healthy and still have symptoms. So I look at what I'm feeling, especially any symptoms that are coming up, and I make intentions and plans. I definitely made New Year's resolutions for my entire young adult life, and I believed them, as we all do. We just feel so excited in December, like, what's your word for the year? My word is clarity. I'm going to do this workout. And we all write these checks that we can't cash because January 1st comes and you wake up and you realize your room looks the same and you're the same. And you expect when it's in the future, that the first you wake up like with this renewed sense of energy, and then you wake up and you go, oh my goodness, it's going to be just as hard to do the things as they were hard in December and November and October and March of last year. So I don't want people to set themselves up for failure, although I think that setting intentions can be really powerful. I just want you to know you can set them in the middle of the year on a Tuesday at 3 p.m. Like, it doesn't need to be the new year.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think about more feasible general aspirations, such as learning a language with no deadline. It doesn't have to be maybe within this year, or just eating out less, whatever that means, eating out less, prioritizing sleep, whatever that means, versus more specific goals, right? Journaling weekly. I named some other ones before. Running a marathon if you've never picked up running before. Those things are just, I think they set us up to fail.
Goals,
Oftentimes.
the truth is that goals are neutral, in my opinion. Like, somebody could be listening to this being like, no, if I didn't set goals, I would never do anything for myself. Or, how can I actually run that 5K or run that marathon unless I set a goal? Goals themselves have complete neutrality. It's the energy behind, and even though it feels over spoken about, it is the why behind why we're setting up the goal. Making sure that that's in the right place and that that's sustainable is more important than whether or not somebody's going to set a goal.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good reminder for the last episode, your first episode with us on the podcast, Carly. And there were so many pearls in that one. So I just want to reference that quickly. We talk about the why in that episode and prioritizing self-care really even before the why. I mean, of course, remembering your why, but generally that's not enough. So that self-reflection, that self-care is so important. And I just want to review this analogy you gave. It was so great in terms of having our phones on all the time with a ton of apps open in the background, just draining the battery without us even realizing it. So if we're just drained of our energy, we're not plugging in, we're not recharging, that can really take away from what you said, is going to maybe inhibit or take away from creating actionable behavioral shifts.
I love
so if
that
we're
you
not plugging in,
reminded me, because I couldn't remember what we talked about. I'm like, yes, I say that, I say that, I say that. So,
yes, it's so powerful, and just plugging yourself in to really put those priorities first. I think that's huge, and I'm wondering kind of, is that analogy you still use? Have you built on that? Is that, I'm sure it fits in with the thought in terms of New Year's resolutions.
yeah, I still use that analogy all the time, because we've all been there where we go to close the apps and realize every single app that we've used for the last 2 months is open and wondering why we have no battery by 2 p.m. And those apps really represent our mental worries and constant to-do lists and all of the multitasking that we're doing. Where I feel the connection happens with goals is that we make a goal because we like the idea of what the outcome will be. Like, I want to read a book a week because the outcome will be at the end of the year, I will have so much wisdom. Or I want to work out 5 days a week because at the end of the year, I will feel empowered in my strength, or I will see this on the scale. And then we don't connect how we need to dilute what we need to do to get there. All of those apps are running in the background, and we think it's just enough to hire a trainer or to buy the books. And we don't go all the way to really micro focus on how we get ourselves all the way to the outcome that we want. You make a goal, and that's just the beginning, or you set an intention, or you make a resolution.
Yeah.
The more important piece here is to understand why we do that. Humans are motivated by pain. We just are. It's a part of our survival mechanism. So what happens is you're dealing with pain, and I don't just mean physical pain, but emotional pain, mental pain, and then we hit a pain threshold. That could be different things for different people. It could be that you have some sort of diagnosis and you go to the doctor and the doctor is now telling you you need surgery and you go, oh my goodness, I need to do something. I need to take action. For women, it can be feeling really heavy or like your favorite pair of pants don't fit, or you look in the mirror or you see a number on the scale and you say, okay, enough's enough. And when we hit a pain threshold, we're really motivated to act. Well, think about New Year's resolutions. You're coming off of Q4, which is the last season, the holiday season. And look at the cultural story around that. It is to eat, drink, and be merry. So we work hard on our health all year long. And then Halloween comes basically, and we go, okay, it's time to eat, drink, and be merry. And we go into this very unconscious, out of balance behavior with our health. There's travel, there's stress, there's family, there's pressure around the holidays, there's all of that. And we typically by December 31st will hit some sort of pain threshold. So here comes the resolution. I mean, we're highly motivated, and that's why we believe the hype. We're like, yes, I'm going to do something about my health because I've hit a pain threshold. I'm so uncomfortable. We all heard I'm going to fudge it, but it's like the average person gains this much weight during the holidays. Like it's kind of crazy. So we hit this pain threshold and we become really motivated to act. So people do dry January, they start a detoxification program, they sign up for some sort of like fitness app or weight loss app. And what happens when the very thing that motivates you disappears? Because that's the next step. As soon as we're starting to be motivated and take some action, our pain threshold disappears. And it's not to say that we've hit our goal. For many of us, we're far from it. But even that first 5 pounds, or even a couple of weeks where you feel more energized, or you've woken up in the morning at 5 a.m. because you've made a commitment to yourself, it's like the second we get even a little bit far away from the pain threshold, it disappears. So most people find themselves around this time, February, March, April, looking behind them like, what was that resolution again?
Yeah.
And really being in a lot of self-judgment because we don't understand why when we do the quote unquote right thing or we do the healthy thing and it makes us feel better, like, why don't we continue that? And so then we judge ourselves like, what's wrong with me? Why I was feeling so good when I did that thing. Why can't I continue to do that thing? And it really comes down to mind work. And just because we know better doesn't mean we do better. And that's really what our conversation is about today. How do you make permanent change so that the next holiday that comes or the next January, you really say to yourself, like, I don't have any resolution because I'm in the daily practice of whether it's like self-development and spirituality, or it's getting physically healthier, or it's working emotionally on your communication. So that's my dream for everyone, is to, instead of looking for like the quick fix, the instant change, or waiting to be in so much pain in order to make change, that we make a decision that our number one goal with whatever change we want to make is that that goal is permanent.
It's so profound too, because I think you're touching on here, Carly, and I want to clarify, is that the pain can be a driver, but we need to find another driver that's not this spike and kind of crash in terms of cortisol and stress and relying on that pain to keep us accountable, because it's not sustainable.
It's a great short-term motivator. And I'm not even anti being motivated by pain. Like pain can motivate people really quickly, but you nailed it. There has to be something else. There has to be pleasure that we're going after. There has to be, and that's where the why comes in. And I think as a practitioner, it's very difficult when someone comes to their doctor or practitioner, they're basically saying, I'm in pain. And
Yeah.
remember, this doesn't need to be physical. It might be low energy. I can't sleep. My hormones are off. I have low sex drive. Like, I'm in discomfort. I'm in pain of some sort. And it is only natural for a practitioner to say, okay, change this. Like, take these supplements, or, do these lab tests, and whatever the results come back, we go, okay, change this behavior. And I believe that practitioners and doctors, like, we have good hearts. We can get frustrated because we want the change more than it feels like the client or patient wants the change.
Totally.
Like, want to shake them sometimes, being like, just do the thing because I want you to be happy and I want you to have a great life because
We want it more than they do.
And it's really important for practitioners and doctors to understand that as much as we want them to change, we are stuck in behavior modification. Do this, don't do that. Eat this, don't eat that. Drink this, don't drink that. Take this supplement, don't put sugar in your mouth. And we don't shift our behaviors simply because of a lack of education. For most of us, it's not an education problem. Are you kidding me? Anytime I put something in my mouth, last night, when I had 4 young kids at my house, only 2 of them were mine. Whoops, I forgot about my 2-year-old. 2 of them were mine, 2 of them were not mine. And it was chaos. And it was a Thursday night. And they all refused the meal that I made, which was very healthy. And they were being annoying. And I was tired. And I wound up eating 2 of the, albeit like gluten-free, dairy-free, whatever, cookies that I had made for them. And okay, maybe it was more than 2, maybe it was 3, maybe it was 4, but it's not from a lack of education. And it wasn't because I was hungry and I needed some sort of mystery nourishment from the cookies. There is a huge gap between knowing better and doing better. And that was such a big understanding for me when I was young in my practice. I felt like, I have a master's degree. I'm a clinical nutritionist. I just had all this education. So I was like, do this, do this, do this, and you'll be well. And then clients would come back initially and they would feel better. And then eventually 100% of them would come back and say that they were struggling putting into practice what I've given them. And I was struggling with my own, practices. And that's when I realized that people need the mind work tools to be able to bridge that gap. And so just to close the loop on yesterday, it's like, so I ate those things. I don't beat myself up about it. It's certainly not a lack of education, but it does shine the light on me checking in with myself. Like, hey, how were you when that happened? Like, what was too much about yesterday? What is it I need? And maybe I'm canceling some plans on the weekend because the cookie behavior was really showing me like, I need some alone time. I need some time to myself. I need to sleep in, not wake up at 5 a.m. and do my health practices. Like, it's not clear cut, but what I promise is your plate is a reflection of your inner state. Your behaviors are a reflection of unmet needs. Every behavior is an attempt to fill an unmet need. And if we can get underneath the do this, don't do that, and really start to help people understand how to bridge that gap and work that mental discipline, then we're really creating change for them.
Yeah, I really like that you touched on that because I've read a lot about the concept about primary versus secondary food. And some practitioners will refer to their primary food as like their relationships, their career, their sleep, and whereas like secondary food is like what's actually on your plate, like for lunch. So I can kind of see the parallels with that and what you're speaking to. But I do want to also talk about some of the more physical limitations, as well as like the mental things that you're touching on. But I want to talk about and shift a little bit into environment and goal setting and how can this be a limitation for some people. So I know a successful environment is really going to be necessary for implementation of a new lifestyle and new habits. But when you're making changes to your nutrition, exercise, wellness habits, how do you coach a client through who doesn't have like the most supportive environment? I hear people say all the time that you can be the average of, the 5 people or 10 people you spend the most time around. But what about if you're somebody that's living with a family that doesn't like to eat healthy, or your friends or relationships or people that, don't work out or don't wake up at 5 a.m.? Like, how do you kind of push yourself into that lifestyle when you're surrounded by almost like the opposite?
When people say that you have to set yourself up for success and they're talking about the external environment, I don't agree. Here's what I think. I think it's ideal
Mm-hmm.
if you can wave a magic wand and be surrounded by all your loved ones who have the same desire to be healthy. If you have the financial budget to like have a trainer or have a gym in your garage or pay for all these labs and supplements and buy organic and all of that stuff. I think that it's or you have the flexibility with your work to exercise and batch cook and take care of yourself. But it can't be contingent upon your success, because now you've taken the power out of your hands and you've put it in the hands of something, some whatever that you can't control. So imagine you're like, today I'm going to, go for a run or a walk outside, and the weather shifts. Now you don't work out. You can't control the weather. And 99% of what people depend on to set up their environment for success is something they can't control. Work, kids, whether they got a good night's sleep or not, weather, traffic. I mean,
I think we do it on purpose.
Yeah, I think that it's a little victim. It's a little like, whoop, out of my hands. Whoop, couldn't do it. I mean, and I say that as someone who's also been like, oh, whoopsie, can't do the yoga, can't find my mat, whatever that is. But to answer your question about, it really needs to be internal. So it would be nice if, but to the people listening who really resonate with that, like, oh, I just don't have this supportive environment, I would say that I will put it out there and not sugarcoat it and call a thing a thing. It will be harder. It's harder. I notice it with before I had kids. I had nothing in the house that wasn't super healthy to eat. And now I have all of this, what I call healthy junk food. So it doesn't have poison ingredients, but it all still comes in a box and the pantry is full of it. And now I live with these little monsters who eat all this stuff. And I'm going, oh, wow, my external environment changed. So now I have much higher trigger to eat foods that before I didn't even think about because they weren't there. So what do? Do I eat the food and blame the kids? Oh, it's these kids making me buy these snacks. I have to put in bigger discipline tools, stronger tools, and also along the way, have a lot of self-compassion to go, wow, this is hard. If somebody doesn't have the support of a husband or children or, it's like, it is hard. And it is important to say to yourself when you're having a hard time, you're not blowing smoke. You're not being judgmental. You are simply stating, like, this feels really hard for me right now. And I'm going to do it anyway. And a lot of the times having a plan B is so massively important. Like, we have the plan A of what we should do or what we're going to do if everything lines up and is perfect. And then there's no plan B. So if anything in that plan doesn't work, we're ordering takeout, skipping the workout, and staying up too late. I'm such a huge proponent of a plan B and sometimes a plan C.
It's almost like taking radical responsibility instead of like the victim mindset. It's like, you know what, this is really challenging. This is really difficult. This person, that person has it better off because they have this environment or that tool. But it's kind of like, hey, this is what I have to work with. And it's almost like, well, what are you going to do about it? Like, are you just going to continue down the path that you're on, or are you going to take responsibility and do what you can to move forward, even if you have plans A, B, and C?
And just notice the difference, because you'll see a lot of people, whether it's on social media or and their message is pushing like, don't be a victim, get through it, do it, make it internal. It's like, Yes, all of those things. And along the way, connect with yourself. And when it's hard, give yourself the grace that it's hard. Be willing to give yourself the compassion to say, like, if my partner ate this way, man, this would feel so much easier. Or if I had a limited budget, this would, like, give yourself that. So it's not two opposite sides of the spectrum of either you're blaming everybody and, what you said, like your environment has to be set up for you to be set up, or you're like giving yourself the army reserves kind of talk. There's a way to be empowered in your own health and to internalize what you need to not depend on external factors while giving yourself a lot of emotional support along the way if it's not there in your community.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, a few sentences back, you did touch on having a plan B and even a plan C if something goes wrong. So I did want to touch on like perfectionism, because I think that's something we can all struggle with in all areas of life. So I know in one of my favorite books, Atomic Habits, he kind of touches on this a little bit and just kind of like the dangers of perfectionism in habit formation. And I think that's just very common in this space in general too. So how do you help your clients deal with setbacks or lapses in their health? Or maybe they have a plan A, B, and C and they slipped up again. Like where do you go from there? Or
Hi, my name is
have it.
Carly, and I'm a recovering perfectionist. I have 5 years. So you have to look at the core of what perfectionism is instead of us saying, like, don't be a perfectionist, take it little, be okay to fail. That sounds great in theory, but it leaves people feeling like in the moment, it feels like that's information for other people, but how do I actually do it? Or it feels like I can't access it. So I just want to go a little bit deeper. Perfectionism really comes from a feeling of we're not good enough and we need that A plus to give ourselves the pat on the back or see that we're good enough through the eyes of other people. If we do this perfectly, we will be adored or approved of by other people. And underneath perfectionism really is fear, the fear of not enoughness. And the cousin to fear is control. So if you're in fear, you're going to be desperate for some sort of certainty or control. And that's ultimately how it bubbles up to the surface. So when you look at eating disorders, over exercisers, or even the opposite spectrum, like someone who doesn't exercise at all, look at them. They're controlling it by saying, I'm not doing it at all. So if you're looking to heal perfectionism, it starts with the inner narrative of you contemplating what is enough. Like, how do you define enough? Healthy enough, thin enough, smart enough, lovable enough, that you spent enough time on that project, that you've spent enough time being a present parent. It's like the enoughness of it all. We all have these unconscious rules for how we give ourselves the pat on the back or the gold star. And those rules need to be brought to the table and redefined if you want to start practicing that balance in the gray area. So the second part of your question, like, what do I say to clients who have plan A, plan B, plan C, D, E, F, G, like it's all blown to, I'll not curse. And they failed. Well, you know what I think about fail? I have an acronym for fail. Find another integral lesson.
Oh, I love that.
In our failures lie the wisdom that we need to make that permanent change, to develop that new permanent behavior or habit. So I'm not a masochist, but like I love a good fail. I love when my clients come to me and go, I tried to do this thing and here's the disaster of what happened. Like, great. As a coach, it's my job to take your failures and help you pull the wisdom out of it so that when you move forward, you have renewed clarity and you're doing something different, not doing the same thing every day and then, banging your head against the wall because you don't understand why you're doing the same thing and not getting a different result. So I love the fail. And when you are so worried about being a perfectionist, you don't allow space for the fail, which means to me, you don't allow space for wisdom and growth.
How do you foster learning from those failures, Carly? Is it journaling, or if someone just says, gosh, I'm just ruminating and beating myself up over this, and they don't see the wisdom in it or how they can maybe move forward from it? And because it's going to be different, taking something out of a failure for me, taking a little piece of wisdom, it's very subjective is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
My insight from a failure is going to be different than your insight for my same failure. So how do we foster those light bulb moments for clients?
You hit it on the nail. I always say, as an analogy for coaching, is like, I'm on the sidelines. You're in your life. You're playing. You can't see anything but like right ahead of you or your story. And I'm a coach. I'm on the sidelines. I can see it all. I can see 2 steps ahead, 2 steps to the side. And so part of it is, if you're in the space or season of your life where getting coaching is available to you, that's amazing. Get a coach. Bring your failures to the table. I have a team of coaches at Nutritional Wisdom, and I would say that 10% of what we do is nutrition and, rooted in functional medicine and the logistics and the lab testing and the supplements. And the other 90% is mind work and self-development work, how we make those changes stick. But for everybody else who doesn't feel like that's accessible to them, then whatever you do, it has to be in intention around the consciousness of whatever it is you're looking at. So you brought up journaling. Journaling is great. And why I think everyone's like, journaling. Like we say it so often because it's a great example of how somebody would take time and reflect. If you're someone who would rather go to the dentist and get a root canal than write their, like write down their feelings, then it can look like something different. It just needs to be intentional reflection, or I call it non-judgmental but ruthless inventory. Like, I want the honesty, but I don't want the judgment with it. In fact, judgment shuts down the part of your brain that needs to be open in order for us to make different neural pathways to learn a lesson and do differently. So we think if we judge ourselves, well, that sort of pain will, again, there's the pain, will help us do better next time. And it's completely the opposite. So it can look like reflection, that you've taken a walk and instead of being on your phone or listening to something, you're just in silence thinking about it. Perhaps you have some time in the morning where you're even doing your morning routine, brushing your teeth, doing something like that. And just instead of letting the narrative go on the random to-do list, you're taking something that you've been bothered by or something you've been struggling with, and you're really looking at it and reflecting. So I love journaling, but I don't want people to think it's the only way. And also talking to a friend. It has to be the appropriate friend, not just the one that's going to go, oh yeah, he's a jerk, get rid of him. But if you have somebody in your life, a partner, a parent, a friend, where you really feel like you can call them and say, I want to process and work through this thing. Will you help me? You're almost like coaching each other, Yeah.
And actually, Carly, kind of like staying on the same topic of like self-reflection. And I know we mentioned a little bit earlier about continuous self-assessment, but I want to kind of marry the two topics together. When you are reflecting and you're doing these like self-assessments, whether it's on a weekly basis, monthly basis, or just kind of trying to navigate how to facilitate all of these habit changes in the new year, how do you decipher through like wants versus needs, and almost like thinking about like how you're feeling about whatever regimen or plan that you're on? Like, how do you take something and say like, okay, this is actually not working for my body. I need maybe to adjust my diet or adjust my workouts or adjust my sleep, versus like, I'm just feeling an emotional way about it. This is probably what's going to be best for me, and I need to work through like an emotional aspect of it. Like, how do you kind of decipher like, this is my want versus my need? What does my body need? What does my mind need? It's so complex. So I want to hear your take on that.
You mentioned at the beginning whether this is weekly, monthly. If we're talking about a logistical goal, somebody wants to lose weight or they want to see their A1C numbers drop, their blood sugar numbers drop, or they want to see an improvement in lab results. Those type of, I say surface level without the intention that it would be attached to like something not important. I don't mean it that way, but just the logistics of their goals, then it depends on what their goals are. If they wanted to balance blood sugar, we might say as practitioners, you're going to give it 3 months and you're going to check in monthly with blood work or your continuous glucose monitor, not blood work, but like pricking your blood and seeing where your numbers are. Or with the A1C, you might not test that for another 3 months. But what you're saying as far as reflection versus wants and needs, that needs to be every day. And this is just checking in with your body, getting to know your body, mind, spirit, and really starting to foster a relationship with yourself. So goals, checking in and how you decipher if you need to shift something to hit that goal. Depending on the goal, weekly, perhaps it's daily for some people, depending on if it's weight loss, something else. But really understanding what it is you need versus what you want. Every day we need to be checking in with ourselves. When we wake up in the morning, how do I feel today? What emotional state am I in? Do I feel happy? Do I feel anxious? Do I feel sad? Do I feel exhausted? And then you ask, I know it's a simple answer, but sometimes the simplicity of it is the core truth. It's like, what do I want? What do I need? And if those two answers don't connect with each other in a way that feels symbiotic, then you, in that moment, take some inventory. Like, why is what I want and what I need not in alignment? How can I make those closer in alignment? Let's say if we're just talking about food, somebody says, I want to stay up late and order fast food tonight because I'm exhausted and I don't want to cook. And then they ask themselves, like, what do I need? And the answer comes like, I need a healthy bone broth soup to help me get closer to my goals of healing my gut. And I need to stay on my mold protocol and my, whatever. And the two are not in alignment, then I continue to foster conversation with myself. Instead of doing the should I, shouldn't I? Oh, I want to, but oh, how will you feel tomorrow? That kind of angel devil conversation that drives us nuts. And then we wind up eating the food or skipping the workout or staying up late and pressing that Netflix button because we just don't even want to hear the voice anymore. I'll foster a conversation that looks like this. How can I get those two answers closer together? Is there something I can order out from a restaurant that's healthier and still under my protocol but feels really comforting? And what if I eat it in bed under the covers watching my favorite movie?
Oh, I love that. It's a compromise.
It is. It's a compromise and it's a negotiation. And look, it's a loving negotiation. You can see in so much of my response to you, and I even notice in so much of the response, it's around self-compassion and having loving, honest conversations with yourself to foster a relationship. And Emmy, you said it, of negotiation. So you're not fighting with yourself. And when you fight with yourself, you're always going to lose.
Wow, it's a lot.
Profound.
But I think I love that you just had such a simple answer, like just kind of asking yourself, like, what do you feel? What do you want? What do you need? Because I would bet a lot of people don't, like, we just don't ask ourselves, which is kind of crazy to think about. So
I have these prompts that I use I use them even myself when I just feel out of touch. But if you're listening to this and you're just starting and you're going, wow, I never talked to myself. I just always let that voice in my head just go on and on and on. I didn't realize I could talk to myself without sounding crazy. I have these prompts that I start the sentence with the prompt and then you fill in the rest of the sentence. Something like, I feel, I need, I trust, I forgive, I release, I accept. And if somebody committed to just journaling for 5 minutes a day, or even just answering the questions out loud to themselves or in their mind, reading the prompts, they would have such a good idea of next steps to take. And you'd be surprised what comes out of your mouth on it. I mean, it still surprises me. And even last night after I ate the cookies and then I felt overly full, it was like, I feel tired. I need a break. Okay, then what do I need to look at? The weekend's coming up. Like, what do I need to do? How do I take action to give myself the break? And if that clashes with my need to be social and to be a good mom, to take my kids to the birthday parties, then you start the negotiation. It's like, how can we win in all fronts?
Mhm.
So being on your own team is so important. You want to make a resolution, make it. You want to make a goal, make it. But you've got to work on these underlying things if you want to see that goal or resolution to its outcome. And then furthermore, continue to have that outcome for the rest of your life.
And I think we haven't touched on values yet. Really getting, and I think that's part of the conversation, at least in my opinion, knowing what our values are and if those are in alignment and in a dynamic way, right, Carly? Because as you so insightfully painted for us, every single day, our needs and our wants are going to change. But if we can go back to our values, I think that helps. What do you think about defining those values and reminding ourselves of those values?
It absolutely. And also, it's okay if when you go back to what you value, you say to yourself, I don't know, like that you're
Yeah.
confused, because all of us will typically say that we value family, health, happiness, but your values need to line up with how you spend your time. The top 3 things you value have to align with how you spend most of your time. And many times there's a values clash. And it doesn't mean that you are ethically
Corrupt.
deficient. Yes. There's very often I have to check myself. If I go, well, I say I value this, but is this where I'm spending my time or even putting my money? And how would it feel if I had to reorganize my values based on my actions instead of just what I was saying? Again, there's no meanness to it. But there have been times in which I didn't want to financially pay for something around my health that was a high ticket item. And then at night when I was tired and I wanted that dopamine hit of online shopping, then I buy a pair of pants that I don't need. And I go, oh, a couple pairs of those pants really would be that cold plunge or that,
Totally.
whatever it is. And so then I have to check myself. Hey, is this in alignment with your values? So if you have to start with what are my values, you can start very simply with, which is, when we love something, we take care of it. So practicing self-love, love for others, and all of the boundaries and discipline and hard decisions that come from that. You're right. It's a trickle down effect, but it is very common, even weekly, for me to have to check myself a little bit. Even if I say I value family, but I'm up here in my office answering more emails as if the emails will somehow stop coming and I would be able to say I have an empty inbox. So I check myself, Carly, where are the boundaries around work? It feels really good to work. I get that dopamine hit. I'm great at what I do. And maybe my 2-year-old's giving me trouble right now.
Carly, I just want to say, you said check yourself, and that can be different depending on the person. And I find personally just verbalizing, as you said, I feel tired without trying to have the whiny tone, right? Sometimes we can't help it, to my partner. I feel tired. I'm crabby. Today was hard. And just verbalizing it, even if I've been thinking it, verbalizing and hearing it coming out of my mouth, I think I will come to maybe a new conclusion or have some new insight around that, or just releasing it. Literally just releasing it, that can be very helpful in moving on from that, and figuring out, okay, so I feel this way and that's okay. And, on to the next thing, as far as like, I've recognized it, I feel better about just letting it go. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so moving on, I want to get a little bit more specific. You mentioned staying up late, I think a couple times now. And so the topic of sleep has been a hot one recently. So do you think as a society, are we downplaying sleep? Do you see that lack of sleep thwarts our best efforts for optimal health? And how does caffeine consumption weave into this? I can imagine a lot of clients struggle with the caffeine and the sleep balance.
So the science of caffeine is that it has a half-life, I think, of about 6 hours. So we've all heard you should stop drinking caffeine after 12 p.m. so you can make sure all of that adrenaline and caffeine is out of your body by the time you're naturally winding down and increasing melatonin levels so that your body can prepare for sleep. So I'm not anti-drinking caffeine. I used to be very purist about this, and I now see that there are some benefits, whether it's for focus, clarity, intermittent fasting benefits. So I'm not unless you're an anxious person. I cannot tell you how many anxious clients I have that drink caffeine and then are more anxious, and they're still so addicted to the caffeine. So if you're struggling with anxiety, cut the coffee for a couple of weeks and notice how much better you're feeling. But I'm okay with somebody drinking a cup of coffee as long as they're doing all their other self-care, liver supporting practices. The not going to sleep at night, again, I feel in my own experience and in my clinical experience is that we are just such a go, go, go culture. We have so much on our plates. There is a real imbalance between doing and being. And then nighttime comes and everything quiets down. And if you have children, they're going to sleep. And it's hard for people to go to sleep early because they want their time. That's honestly the biggest thing I hear from clients who are struggling with sleep is that they just want more time in the wind down. And what I teach them is it is just as quiet in the early morning to wake up early morning, but much more hormonally beneficial and much more productive. 10, 11, 12 p.m., there's no productivity for me. I am just laying in bed. Most people are watching TV. But when you wake up in the morning, that would be a time that people are massively productive, whether with self-care or creativity. And if you're listening to this and saying, well, I'm really productive at night, there is no one size fits all approach. And if that works for you, and then you stay up later and you can afford in your lifestyle to wake up later, it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I do think sleeping according to our circadian rhythm is massively important for our health, and caffeine can affect it if you're drinking it too late in the day.
And Carly, kind of going off of sleep too, how does it affect cravings? I know we mentioned a little bit about like if we're craving sugar, it's a time to check in with ourselves, see what we need. Maybe it's more sleep, maybe it's more rest. But I do want to ask about how sleep affects cravings. And then what are your thoughts on like sweeteners that are either artificial or natural, like these 0-calorie, like stevia, monk fruit? Does that have positive or negative influence?
Typically between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. is when we're receiving our psychological repair. That's when your neurotransmitters are balancing. The most important one in conversation for cravings is dopamine. That's the pleasure center of the brain. That's what just lights up when we eat that sugar or that processed carbohydrate. And so when you don't get deep, restful sleep, the next morning you wake up and your neurotransmitters are still depleted. And the mind, in its effort to balance, which doesn't always mean it's trying to keep you healthy. If we are very acidic, the body will pull calcium from the bones, which is our most alkaline buffer, to create balance. So the body's job is to keep you alive, not to help you thrive. So if the next day your dopamine levels are low, it goes, eat sugar. That'll get these numbers back up. That'll get that serotonin right where it needs to be. So that's the connection between sleep and cravings, I know if I have interrupted sleep, I'm already mentally preparing myself with a plan B, like you're going to crave more sugar tomorrow, or you're going to be craving carbohydrates. What do you have on hand to help you get through those tougher emotional spots where you're really hyper focused on something?
And do you give in a little bit? Like, do you kind of negotiate your way through that and maybe have like more carbohydrates or a little bit of like a healthier sugar? Or do you still try to stick to a more rigid or typical day to day and just trying to do the mental work around it to not let yourself have the sugar?
It's a great question. It depends. It depends on the day. It depends on my goals, whether I'm in maintenance or if I'm actively, for example, like in weight loss versus in maintenance.
Mhm.
My intention is to always use my tools to eat when I'm physically hungry and to eat nourishing food. But anything that's too rigid breaks. So absolutely, if there's a day I'm craving sugar, I fill my house with a lot of natural alternatives. So what you said, I do like stevia. We grow it in our backyard.
Oh, very
Stevia is a
cool.
leaf. It is 300 times sweeter than sugar, but you could rip a leaf off and put it on your tongue and it tastes sweet. So I know when people go to the store, they see it in liquid or powder form, and that can be confusing. Is this a highly processed thing? But if I took the leaves, dried them, and mashed them up, I would have stevia powder. So I really love stevia as number one. I do like monk fruit sweetener. It doesn't spike the blood sugar. It's 0 calories, but it is not a artificial sweetener. I think, as you would assume, I am vehemently against artificial sweeteners. The unlimited amount of studies linking them to cancer, heart disease, and really just mortality in general, and that it tricks the brain to crave more sugar, to crave more processed food and junk. So I'd rather somebody get fat off sugar than get cancer from artificial sweeteners. Like, use that little bit of honey or maple syrup, and even better, if you like stevia or monk fruit, go with those alternatives.
I really want to touch on testing in this context, Carly, briefly, because we all know that there are data-driven clients who are really psyched about getting their annual tests, not just their routine blood work, but functional medicine tests, and maybe even more frequently. But then I find there are some patients who might be in denial about poor gut health, inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, which we were talking about earlier, nutrient deficiencies, toxins, which are all around us. So how do you appeal to those clients? Are you starting with just like, let's just take a little peek at this one test? I think that this would be insightful, even though you feel that they could use a whole panel, to really inform next steps. How do you tackle those cases?
I love that you said data driven. I am also very data driven. I think that there's a beautiful dance between being a total science geek, which I am. I want to run all the labs. I run all the labs on myself multiple times a year. I think everyone should do a micronutrient test before they take supplementation. I really love data, and marrying it with the deeper work that we've been talking about here. I don't think it could be all or nothing. Just getting a bunch of data and forcing behavior modification, which is temporary, or only working on the mind and the emotional relationship to food and ignoring that there is a fire going on underneath. A perfect example would be, what if somebody has underlying infection, mold toxicity, leaky gut, multiple parasite, candida, bacterial infections? We know that that's going to affect their brain, how they think, their memory, how they sleep, their mood. So there are times in which you really need to get that information to get them over a hump to where the mental and emotional and self-development work that they're doing actually brings them to the next level of health. What do I do if somebody is hesitant to get those tests? Is I don't try to convince them, let's just start with one test. I will do mind work first. I want somebody so excited to spend their money and receive this information about themselves. If you have somebody who's super hesitant, the lens with which they'll look at the results, ever have somebody get mad at you because nothing came up in the test?
Mm-hmm.
And they're so annoyed that they spent X amount of money and they
Yeah.
wanted something to come up and the test was clear. And then your response as a practitioner is what? We need to do another test. If I think it's this test and nothing comes up, I go, well, we need to unturn another stone. And then you're the bad person, just snake oil salesman, spending their money, forcing them on this rabbit chase. So I am really careful. I would help them understand why it's so important to look underneath the hood and how information can be so powerful, and get them to the place where they're emailing me, have you got my test results back? I'm like, no, I will tell you, but I love how enthusiastic you are for getting those results. So, getting someone there.
And I have to ask, this is not on the outline, but you must have had training in psychology, right? Melissa was talking about motivational interviewing, the last episode. It really seems like the way that you talk about the coaching style and your coaching aspect of your practice, it's almost like the motivational interviewing was even just weaved into the episode that we shot last.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just have to know what kind of training have you received in terms of the therapy? Because I think
What's really
spot on.
interesting is, you could go for all these certifications like life coach, this coach.
Yes.
But when I started my practice, and I think I talked about this in our first podcast together, that I realized soon after seeing a couple of hundred clients, that if I didn't put some of the science books down and really devote the rest of my life to studying the human mind, human behavior, what makes us tick, why do we sabotage ourselves? Why does person A hear something, do it and get it done, and person B wants it just as badly and just can't, get to the finish line? And so I just started reading book after book after book, taking online courses, going to seminars. I couldn't really tell you or remember any sort of certification that I have, but I have a elephant's memory of library of like 100+ books, and I'm always reading. You will never catch me not reading a book. I'm usually reading 2 books at once. I'm usually listening to a book on Audible and reading a physical book that I highlight. When I'm done with the book, I take notes on it and make my own cliff notes. I go back and review those notes. When I'm reading the book, I'm constantly thinking about how this works for me, how this would work for my clients, how to distill it down into like my type of teaching. So many of these books I read are really like far out spirituality books or like really intense psychology books. And I feel, if I may compliment myself, I feel like I really am talented in how to bring all of that information to like real speak. People don't want to
Yes.
hear these fancy things, and the spirituality can sometimes feel really overwhelming and over your head. You're reading the same page twice. Everything I'm reading it through the lens of how do I distill it down so that people can really understand this and take this information and take action with it. So I don't have any certification except for my own complete commitment for the rest of my life to study human behavior.
It's very clear.
Yeah.
Loud and clear. Beautiful.
I always think the best and the most well-rounded practitioners always have a personal story. And I feel like yours is just so loud. And I feel like it really just complements everything that you taught yourself through the books and everything like that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa.
So before we wrap up here, I do have a couple of final questions. One that I really wanted to ask you. Still reflecting on your experience, your education, your knowledge, working with clients. And I know you're in like kind of the social media space too. You really are out there in the media. So I do have to ask you, reflecting on your extensive experience, if you could advocate for one major change in like the public's perception of health and wellness, what would it be and why?
The major perception I would like to change is that it's too expensive to do what you need to do to be healthy. And so we look at all these really fancy gadgets, which if you follow me on social media, I am completely to blame. I have an infrared sauna. I do my red light. I own a plunge. I am, I have my ozone machine. It's like I have biohacked the home. But you know what? You don't need any of these things. And what we tend to do is look at all the fancy stuff and go, I don't have that, so I can't do it. You know what the foundations are? How you move your body, what you drink, the foods you eat, how you sleep, and the thoughts you think. And it is absolutely within most, I will not say all, but most people's reach to start to work and take small steps in this direction. And why I don't say all is because there is always that extreme case where someone is really just like not physically able. But I will even look at other people and go like, oh, that's not available to me. It's like, it doesn't have to, people go, oh, your cold plunge. Hey, find a person in your neighborhood in the winter with a pool. Ask if you can go in. You have a shower, take a cold shower at the end. Walking in nature and getting sun on your skin, like these things, so much of health really like is free. Pick up a book for $12, read that book, start to implement those practices. So that would be the biggest perception. Not to say that we do know that there's a lot of parts of preventing health that are expensive. Lab testing is expensive and it's not covered by insurance most times. Supplements that are high quality can be expensive. Not all organic food, but some organic food can be very expensive, especially if it's out of season. So I don't want to sound out of touch. I totally get that it can be pricey when you're getting up to that level. I just think most people will feel a million times better without ever needing to go there.
And I almost think I love that you touched on that's, how sometimes you might need testing if you have like a specific ailment, and obviously that can be expensive, but it's almost like start here first, because even if you do like the mold test or the toxicity test or the micronutrient test, if you're not going to fix all the free things, like it's kind of like, what's the point? Like, what's the point of taking the supplement if you're not going to eat real food, and, vice versa. So I do love that. And then before we wrap up here, we actually asked our last podcast guest to leave a question for the next practitioner that we had on the show. So you're the first round that we're doing with this.
Oh, that's so fun.
Isn't that unique? I thought it was really fun. So the question that our last guest left us was, if there's one rule in medicine that you would like to change, what would it be?
One rule in medicine?
Mm-hmm.
That there are specialists for everything and nobody talks to each other. And that I wish that if people, that there would be a rule that you have to take continuing education, and that if you believe something, you should actually take education on the opposite. Like when I'm looking for something to ring true, there's a study on everything that could prove every point, yes. Opposite points. And if I'm looking for something, I'm going to look for that opposite thing, because I want to get both sides of the coin. I want to not get so stuck in my story and what works for me and what my opinion is as a practitioner. I want to get both sides. I want to celebrate the biochemical individuality of everybody's body and know that it can be different for everybody. So I just wish there was a rule we all had to learn from each other. We needed continuing education, not just in the field we were in, and that there wasn't so much like ego in medicine that if we don't, we're not up on something, we're typically down on it. How many gastroenterologists I've referred out and they look at some of the lab testing and go, oh, no, that functional lab testing, that's not legit. They don't know anything about it. They just know that it's not the testing that they use. So I don't know. Is that a rule? I wish it would be a law that we all had to learn from each other.
It's almost like, let's cancel the confirmation bias.
Exactly.
We all live in those.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like everything's cherry picked nowadays. And I totally agree with you. I love that. Well, we really did touch on literally so much today. I'm probably going to go back and re-listen to this a couple of times just because I feel like we had so many good pieces of information and like tangible tips. And from your first episode that carried into today, I love the conversation. Definitely going to be revisiting the journal after today. And I'm glad to know that my stevia and my coffee is okay too.
Yes, rock on.
But if our listeners want to learn more about you, your practice, your services, I think we even have different courses you can take on your site. Tell us where we can find you.
Sure. So my private practice is called Nutritional Wisdom. So they can go to that website, especially if they're interested in one-on-one coaching and what that looks like. We see people all over the country, and sometimes in other countries, we're completely virtual. And if they want to learn more about myself, they can go to carlypollack.com. That's where all my online courses live. I have a 4-week online course called End Emotional Eating. And just this week, I launched a course called Daily Detox Advanced, and I launched this along with my dear friend, Carly Brown, who healed herself from thyroid cancer using holistic methods. And we're really excited about that course. It's really advanced, deeper detox. We offer lab testing as add-ons. So it's very sciencey, but that's the course that we just launched. And of course, I'm on Instagram under my name, Carly Pollack.
Amazing. Well, we're going to be making sure to link your website and all of your contact information in the show notes on the episode today. So listeners, be on the lookout for that. I just want to thank you, Carly, so much for your time and coming on the show again today. I seriously enjoyed it, and I know our audience is going to take so much away from today's episode. So thanks everyone for tuning in. And until next time, I'm wishing you all vibrant health and wellness.
Thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so we can continue to pay it forward together. And remember, the key to longevity is knowledge. Keep learning, growing, and tuning in to the Vibrant Wellness Podcast to discover the latest insights and strategies for optimal health. Join us again next week. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The views expressed by guest and host are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy of Vibrant Wellness. As always, consult your healthcare provider before applying any recommendations that you heard here today.